From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today, K-State's Jane Lingenfelser will go over the corn hybrids that stood out in K-State's statewide 2017 corn performance test, the results of which are now summarized and available to you corn growers as you contemplate your seed selection for next year's crop. Also, K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti will talk about how you producers can capitalize on the field information that satellite imagery can provide. He and the team of precision agriculture specialists at K-State continue to develop ways of processing that imagery for practical use in crop production. Later, K-State's Charlie Lee reports on the latest research on translocating wildlife. All this and more here on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You row crop growers have been awaiting the test results from K-State's 2017 field performance trials, and those are starting to come together and are now being made available to you growers as you make your plans for seed selection for 2018 production. And the corn numbers are now finalized, and we'll pick up on those right here. Along with us, once again, is the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests each year, Jane Lingenfelser. Jane, it was quite a path to this data, which we'll talk of in a minute. But the results, they are online, right?
They are online, and that address of our website is www.agronomy, that's agronomy.kstate.edu. And the entire 2017 Corn Book will be published, as it usually is, as an insert in High Plains Journal magazine, which will come out later this month. And the PDF can be found electronically at the K-State Research and Extension Digital Publications Library. That address is www.ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore and click on the corn link.
And we would, of course, encourage growers to study the entire report, for it is teeming with great information on hybrid performance. This 2017 corn growing season had its oddities, irregularities, and challenges, and that does factor into the tests, right, Jane?
As they all do. But yes, the 2017 corn growing season was interesting in that it had potential and was hopefully very productive for corn growers in the state. But it was also a little bit frustrating for people like me who were trying to identify patterns on the performance of the hybrids. There were very distinct weathered patterns in the east, central, and western parts of the state, which consequently caused different effects on the corn grown in those areas. But within areas of the state, on the field level, we found that most of the corn performed about the same this year. In some of the performance tests around the state, which I will identify when I get to those test results, there were no or very few statistical differences between the majority of hybrids. So it is always a good idea to look at multiple sources and multiple years for making your hybrid decisions. But this year, it is especially important because it just wasn't a really decisive year.
Jane, what we'd like to do here is to, as we've done in the past, go region by region around the state and talk about the test results, stressing here that these are some of the standout hybrids that we find as you look over the numbers for this past year.
Yep, and as you say, this is by no means the exhaustive list of hybrids that yielded well. So in each table, there are yields in bold font. These are yields that are in the same LSD group, meaning that statistically, one hybrid isn't better than the other, even though there may be a multiple bushel difference. We can only say that a hybrid is better than another if the yields differ by more than that LSD value, which is provided at the end of each table.
That said, let's walk through the numbers from one end of the state to the other, and starting with your dryland trials in northeast Kansas. You actually had 2 locations when it was all said and done.
We did. We had Manhattan in Riley County and Onega in Pottawatomie County. We also offered Severance in Doniphan County. However, it was not planted due to a lack of entries. But for Manhattan and Onega, it was a corn-soybean rotation at Onega, and our tests followed wheat at Manhattan. The average across the northeast dryland region was 157 bushels. I believe this is slightly down from last year. And good performers in the northeast dryland region, Dynagrow D54 DC94 did well. Also Midland 757 PR and NewTek 5FB 9016 did well.
Again, in the dryland tests for the northeast part of the state. Likewise, you had similar tests in the northeast, but for irrigated conditions.
Yes, and we had Ashland Bottoms in Riley County, Scandia in Republic County, and Rossville in Shawnee County as our irrigated test in the northeast. These were all in a corn-soybean rotation. And the average across the region was 229 bushels. I believe that's slightly up from last year. And the good performers in the irrigated tests, Dynagrow D58 SS65, Midland 594 PRDG, NewTek 5FB 1010, and Producers 7428 STX RIB did well in the irrigated tests. But again, I would caution people that we didn't see large separations within hybrids within our irrigated tests this year.
Jane, as we pick up then on the results from the dryland tests in the eastern part of the state, and this actually spills over into southeast Kansas, what locations were featured here?
The tests of the eastern and southeastern dryland region were Cairo in Shawnee County, Ottawa in Franklin County, and Erie in Neosho County. These all represent heavy clay soils, all followed soybeans. The average for the East Dryland region was 176 bushel, which I believe is up from last year. And our good performers in the East Dryland region, Dynagrow D52 SS63 and D58 SS65 did well. Also Midland 656 PR. Morecorn MC 4725, and NewTek 5F 515 did well in the eastern dryland region.
Let's find out how the central Kansas tests fared then, if we might. And you had 2 locations where data was collected there.
Yes, in the central region, we had Assaria in Saline County and Belleville in Republic County. It was a corn-soybean rotation at Assaria, and the tests followed grain sorghum at Belleville. The average for the region was 154 bushel, which was very good, considering Assaria is typically our droughtiest location. And the good performers in the central region, Golden Harvest G07B39, LG Seeds LG 5650 STX RIB, also Phillips PSF 138 did well, and Producers 6093 VT2 Pro did well in the central region.
South Central irrigated tests, you actually were able to collect data from 3 sites in this instance, Jane.
Yes, we had Moundridge in McPherson County, Maxville in Stafford County, and Hutchinson in Reno County. The average across the South Central irrigated region was 227 bushels. However, as I mentioned before, our irrigated test didn't really show the best separation among hybrids, but the good performers in the South Central irrigated region, Dynagrow D52 VC71WX did well, Golden Acres G5788 VT2 Pro, NewTek, an experimental from NewTek, X5FN 1510 did well. Also Phillips PSF 133 and Producers 7428 STX RIB did well in the South Central irrigated region.
As we move into the western part of the state then, and dryland as well as irrigated, you had 3 locations for each. Start with the dryland, where it was an unusually good year because moisture was comparatively plentiful.
It was. Our western dryland tests, we had Hayes in Ellis County, Colby in Thomas County, and Garden City in Finney County. Colby followed a fallow year, and Hayes and Garden City followed wheat. The average for the West Dryland region was 110 bushels, which is very good for that region. And our good performers there, Dynagrow D52SS63, Golden Acres 4173A did well, and also Rank RK877DG VT2 Pro did well in the West Dryland region.
And what about your hybrids in irrigated systems for western Kansas?
Our irrigated tests, we had Colby in Thomas County, Tribune in Greeley County, and Garden City in Finney County. Our Garden City test followed wheat. Tribune and Colby were fallow tests. Hail and high winds in August were a factor at Tribune and Garden City, leading to a lot of lodging and eardrop at those tests. And the lodging percentages are reported in the table for Tribune. But the average across the region was 194 bushels, which is fair. And our good performers in the West irrigated test, Ag Venture, EXP 182127 did well. BH Genetics BH 8688 DG2P did well. LG Seeds, LG 5634 STX RIB did well. And finally, Rank RK 941 SXTX did well in the Western Irrigated region.
Well, Jane, again, this is just a sampling of what producers can find in the overall report, and you would once more urge that they study the data and seek out that information that will be helpful to their corn production operations.
That's right. We also provide the list of seed treatments that was provided by the company, also growing degree days, herbicide, disease, and insect-resistant traits, also provided by the company. Those are all listed online at www.agronomy.ksu.edu or at the KSRE Digital Library. That address is www.ksre.ksu.edu/bookstore and click on the corn link. And all of this will additionally be available in the 2017 Kansas Performance Tests with Corn Hybrids, which will be an insert and a flip book with High Plains Journal later on this month and will be in local extension offices.
And Jane, you're soon to finalize the grain sorghum hybrid performance test results as well. So if we can have you back, we'll cover that information at that time.
Be happy to.
And in the meantime, thanks for coming over today. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
She's Jane Lingenfelser, the agronomist in charge of K-State's crop performance tests each year. And with that overview of the 2017 corn performance test results from the various locations around the state of Kansas this past growing season. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Within all the new technology that has splashed onto the crop production scene here in recent years, there is one capability that may be more utilized in the future, although producers are still in large part sorting out just how it might fit their operations. That is the use of satellite imagery. Well, our guest now just put together a great article on this topic in a recent Agronomy E-Update newsletter using satellite data to help guide agronomic decisions. Ignacio Ciampitti is Mike's side once more, crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. The broad array of satellite services out there has opened up the door, Ignacio, for a number of possibilities here, you say.
Yeah, just to start, satellite is nothing new. We had been acquiring satellite information since probably 1979 or even before. The game changer is not just the acquiring the information, but just really how to utilize that information and to make sure that it's easy to access for our farmers and also that it can have a good interpretation. Mm-hmm. And I think that those are the key points why satellite will become and is becoming one of the tools, okay? Again, this is not replacing any agronomist. I will tell now at the beginning of the radio, and I will finish with that.
Right. it has its place within the mix here. But you are getting questions from producers. This has captured their fancy, if nothing else, hasn't it?
I mean, from producers, from companies, one of the main attractions that they have is farmers that they have access to satellite information. So something that you might just go to an app or you go to a website and then you look at your field real time and you get access to last week or last 2 weeks satellite information. So you can start seeing how your crop is moving during the growing season, and you might be able to identify sections of the field, areas of the farm that they might need your attention. So you can focus on those specific areas.
We won't get deeply into the technicalities of the imagery provided, other than to note there are more than a few sources out there from which a producer could choose anymore, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and today, probably one of the main difficult part of the satellite information is the process analysis. Because in between access to the data and the final product, there is a step that is a processing. Right. And that processing is what we are within my group. I mean, we are basically doing the post-processing of all the images. And our goal is always the same, to collect something to prepare a final product so we can guide the farmers to take those decisions. And you cannot even imagine the number of satellites. We just highlight in our document, at least I will say 4 of the most popular. And when you're looking at these 4 of the most popular, it depends what is your objective. For example, if I want to go back in time, and if I want to look to my field or my 100 or 1,000 acres the last 10 years, the resource of satellite is probably not the best resolution. And when we talk about resolution, is the number of pixels per area. So probably not the best resolution of images, but you will be able to get access to a temporal analysis. So that is, for example, is the Landsat. So that's one of the satellites. So if farmers today want to see specifically something from the last 2 growing seasons and in more level of detail, then they can move to, for example, Rapid Eye. That's one satellite, or Sentinel. Rapid Eye, the resolution is even higher. Mm-hmm. When we are talking about resolution, that means that farmers will be able to see things in much more detail. And sometimes it's 10 times more details as compared with the Landsat. And Landsat is a really good satellite resource just to many times to do temporal analysis, or if we're looking at state level or regional level. But things are evolving so fast. I mean, in the last, even as we are discussing today, they might be launching other countries multiple satellites. And they are moving into nano satellites. They're moving into satellites that they only weigh 50 pounds. They're moving into satellites that they will be able not only just to detect different mass of plants in the fields, but also satellites that they will be identifying or providing some information about what is the soil water content in the surface in our crops. Or moving into satellites that they will be launched very soon on really looking at the functionality of the plant. There will be a satellite that will be looking at the chlorophyll fluorescence. I mean, the chlorophyll is one of the main pigments in the leaf of the plants, involved in the photosynthesis. Basically, to fix carbon is just to feed the plant. Mm-hmm. So imagine those things that are occurring all these years, and then start thinking, what are the things that will come in the next 5-10 years? I think that will be really a huge opportunity. So my goal with this information and our goal as a team, we want to make sure that we can start providing to our farmers tools to do a good interpretation. Mm-hmm. And I think one of our challenges is really to keep up with our farmers. Our farmers are getting access to a lot of information from many multiple sources. And then our challenge for the next couple of years is really to see how we can provide tools to make sure the farmers are able to interpret the data, use the data, and make some sense of the data to really implement changes on the operations.
As you're talking, it's very, very clear that there is a multitude of possibilities here as far as the kind of data that can be derived from satellite imagery. But as you look at it right here and now, Ignacio, the practical applications of the data, the functions that this data can truly support, what do you think are the main processes that this information can support out there?
Well, that's an excellent question. In fact, when we work on this publication, we are finishing an extension publication on this topic. Mm-hmm. And we ask ourselves within my group the same question. So if we need to sit down and if we need to start thinking about what are the main 4 or 5 applications, how is satellite helping farmers today to really be effective in taking a decision? I will give you a few examples. I have one farmer in one of our meetings asking me, do you think that I can get access to my field? And I say, yeah, if you send me the township section range, I will get you any satellite that you want. And then he followed up with that and saying, do you think that I might be able to make a decision in a land that is in CRP, that I never touch it, and trying to decide, what crop, but not only what crop, what level of inputs I'm planning to use in each of these sections of the field. And then you can provide, and we were able to provide, like saying, last 10 years of information on that CRP land. It was a big field, and show the level of productivity of that land. And then that gives you an advantage, starting from not knowing how that land will produce when you start switching from CRP to agriculture. That's one example, and that was a simple example. Crop scouting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so 500 acres. If you get a good on-time satellite data, very good resolution of the satellites that we have today, they can give you a really good indication if maybe the irrigation pivot in one area is not working or not delivering water, and the section of that crop is under stress, or if you have a high pH area.
Irregularities in the field, right?
Irregularities in the field, so that it will help you to be more precise when you are doing your scouting and identifying the problems and then solving those problems. Okay, becoming more effective. Mm-hmm. Close to that, management zones. We have been talking about probably about management zones since the last 20 years. Right. We are getting there. I think that every time that we have a new layer of information is helping our farmers to really make one baby step towards that goal of really thinking that in these economic times, identifying variability so you can start moving into management zones.
We're to the point where integrating this information into more precise applications, field operations. We're close to that, if not right there, you're saying that.
Exactly. And it's not about one layer of information. So you might have information on soil sampling. You might have information on your yield monitor, variability of yield during the field. For precision, variable seeding rate, for variable fertilization. So satellite will help us, did you do a good job or not when you were applying your fertilizer? Is the crop responding to that or not? So it's giving us in-season information that in the past was really hard to get access to.
We're looking forward to finding out what you and the precision agriculture team here at K-State Research and Extension will be developing over the years. And producers should stay attuned to those advances as they come along. But once again, the imagery is a great addition to the toolbox, but it's not a full substitute, you're stressing, for the standard infield crop scouting and the utilization of trained agronomists in these areas.
The agronomists are still key. These tools are just helping us to improve our efficiency, trying to see how we can improve operations for our farmers here in the state of Kansas.
Producers, take a look at this article, which details quite a bit of what we've been discussing here today with Ignacio in the Agronomy E-Update newsletter dated Friday, November the 13th. It's entitled Using Satellite Data to Help Guide Agronomic Decisions. It's an exciting area for the future of crop production here in the state of Kansas, to be certain, and we wish you well as you continue to develop these tools. Ignacio, thank you for coming over.
Thanks again for the invitation.
Crop production and cropping systems specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Ignacio Ciampitti. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And for you, next up, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, increased U.S. ethanol production could translate into a higher mark for conventional ethanol under the renewable fuel standard than the current 15 billion gallon level, according to EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. While some have criticized the EPA for not increasing its biofuel target for biomass-based biodiesel and conventional ethanol, Pruitt said in an interview in Iowa over the weekend that the agency sets the mandate targets as objectively as possible. When the export of ethanol is put into the mix, Pruitt said he was encouraged that the industry could break the cap, and should that happen, he said, quoting here, we can reset that number and go above the cap. Mexico presents an opportunity, Pruitt observed, as they're poised to implement an RFS-type program there where they will mandate a certain percentage of their fuel that will have ethanol. On biomass-based biodiesel, then, Pruitt said what those backing the biofuel have to remember is that capacity is different than production. He said one might have the capacity to produce 2.6 billion gallons, but then you have to produce it. The EPA set the biomass-based biodiesel mandate at 2.1 billion gallons for 2018. That's unchanged from this year, noting that we imported 700 million gallons from Argentina to meet that 2.1 billion number, and we should not be importing biodiesel to meet our obligation that we have already set. Meantime, Senator Ted Cruz will meet with President Trump regarding biofuels. Reuters is reporting that the president has agreed to meet with Cruz and representatives from the oil refining industry to discuss the RFS. The White House says the discussion could set the stage for negotiations over possible legislation to overhaul the renewable fuel standard. Cruz has been blocking the confirmation vote of Iowa Agriculture Secretary Bill Northey's nomination to a top USDA post, demanding a meeting with the president and others. That meeting is now likely to be scheduled for next week. Cruz and 8 other senators from states with oil refineries had requested the meeting with the president in a letter back in October. In that letter, the senators asked that the meeting include Midwest lawmakers, biofuels representatives, and relevant administration officials so all sides could discuss a pathway forward toward a mutually agreeable solution. Just how fast is broadband internet growing in rural America? A new USDA report looks at the trends, as we hear now from the USDA's Rod Bain.
USDA's latest edition of its Rural America at a Glance study looked at the growth of internet broadband over the last 15 years.
There's been a very large increase in the use of broadband since 2001. In rural areas, it went up from 2 to 61% between 2001 and 2016.
Yeah, John Cromartie of the Economic Research Service says rural broadband subscription growth slowed down after 2010, in part due to options such as cellular phone service. However, when looking at rural household broadband connectivity on a countywide level,
the change that it shows just over the last 6 years indicates that there's been a fairly significant expansion in terms of broadband use, improvement in broadband use in many counties in rural areas.
Meanwhile, internet access remains limited in some rural locales, such as those that are isolated or located in high-poverty, high-minority areas. Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And next up, milk lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. Mike?
Today I'd like to speak with our Kansas dairy farmers concerning what we might be looking at as we go forward into 2018 in terms of milk price and cash flow on our dairy farms. You know, as I look ahead to some of the predictions and some of the information that we're receiving about 2018, I wish I could say it was a bright future for the price of milk, and it appears that that's probably not the case, at least for sure for the first 6 months of 2018. So as we think about our farms and how we're going to maintain cash flow, I think there's some important things for you to consider. Number one, if you have the ability to achieve bonuses for either milk quality, and that could be either for somatic cell or bacteria counts, I would encourage you to make sure that you're receiving those bonuses. Many times there are things that we can easily do to achieve those bonuses. We really shouldn't pass those up. So, again, if you're not receiving the maximum bonuses in those areas, I encourage you to take a look at that. Secondly, volume of milk becomes important. That's the amount of milk that each cow gives and the number of cows that you're milking. So there's a couple different ways that you can maintain or increase milk volume. You could add a few cows. You could take a look at the cows that you currently have in the herd and try to determine where your break-even milk price is. In other words, how much milk do they need to be giving each day to actually be paying their way on your farm? Is that 30 pounds, 40 pounds? Wherever that line is, draw a line, figure out which cows are below that line, then evaluate whether or not they still need to be on your farm. As you're doing that, you might look at some of those lower producing cows too. Maybe they're above that line, but they're still not giving as much milk as a heifer in that same place would give. So if you're looking at a 50-pound or 60-pound cow and she's open, if you had a heifer in her place, would that heifer be giving 80 pounds? Again, seems like just a little bit for each animal, but if you do several different things, you can start to increase the volume of milk that's in the tank that's going to be sold. Important in keeping your farm cash flowing in the next 6 to 8 months. Now, let's talk about the big chunk of your cost of production. That comes in feed. So you really need to sit down with your nutritionist and have some serious discussions about how you can more economically feed your herd. You know, as you inventory the stored forages that you've harvested in 2017 moving into 2018, what kind of volume do you have there that you could run through the cows? Are you purchasing things today to feed the cows that you wouldn't have to, that you could maybe use some of those stored forages that you've already invested in? So again, this is something that you really need to visit with your nutritionist to determine how you can best economically feed your cows for the next several months. Now, it may be that we could feed more stored forages this winter with the idea that we would have to raise additional stored forages in 2018 and that those would be ready in time to be consumed by our cattle. As you make that decision, though, be careful. Make sure that you have dollars set aside for the cost of planting and growing those forage crops for 2018. So again, another way to increase your cash flow on a short-term basis, maybe for the next 6 to 8 months, but in the future you will have to replenish those reserves that you have taken away from your inventory. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to look for ways that they can increase profitability in 2018.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Rounding out this Agriculture Today, we'll visit once again about another aspect of wildlife management. Joining us, as he does each week this time, wildlife specialist Charlie Lee, K-State Research and Extension. Returning to the topic, Charlie, of translocating wildlife for more than one purpose here, which we'll get into, but this is a practice that's been tried for various reasons over the many years.
Yes, well, we've looked at translocation of nuisance wildlife at times in the past, but translocation of wildlife can be animals, not just necessarily those that cause nuisance situations, but those that biologists are attempting to establish or reestablish or perhaps augment existing wildlife populations. This came to play really in a large scale at the time the Endangered Species Act became law. There were attempts to try to consolidate animals into areas, try to augment their populations, and move them into areas where they had some historic range. Currently, there's still a lot of translocation going on, and you can look at those type of efforts here in Kansas, which is translocation of captive-reared animals for the black-footed ferret program. With the Endangered Species Program having problems at times in looking for success stories, biologists are always looking for better ways to get success out of these translocation events. And there has been scientists that looked at this, particularly as a species conservation tool, and evaluated many of these translocation events and came up with some ideas for folks to consider when they're thinking about using translocation as a means to increase wildlife in a certain area.
Well, right to that then, what is known definitively as to the effectiveness of translocation for boosting wildlife numbers?
Well, we do know that there are a lot of things that come into play when we look at the success rate of translocation efforts. There are several factors that are probably more important than others, and one of the first ones is that native game species are more likely to be successfully translocated than threatened, endangered, or sensitive species. In the over 80 translocation efforts that they looked at for threatened, endangered, or sensitive species, that was only a 44% success ratio. But when they looked at about 100 translocation efforts with native game, 86% of those were successful. Another factor that plays a large role is the release area habitat. When the release area habitat was excellent, we certainly had a higher percent success rate than when the release area habitat was considered fair or poor. When the animal then was released into the core of a historic range, not on the periphery, but in the core of the historic range, it was again a 76% success rate when compared to the periphery or outside the historic range. That was only about a 48% success rate. It was also important to know whether the animals were wild caught or captive reared. Again, almost twice as good a success rate on wild-caught animals that were then translocated compared to the release or translocation of captive-reared animals. Then the last factor was really what type of food habit did that particular animal utilize. And those that were strictly herbivores had the highest percent of success compared to the others. So I think those factors, when we look at what type of species it is, the release area habitat, and whether it's wild-caught or captive-reared, all have major roles to play in the success of a translocation effort. And without high-quality habitat, translocations seem to have a very low chance of success, regardless of how many organisms you put into the area. And I see that happening currently in some of the translocation efforts with endangered species. We're having to continually augment existing populations with captive-reared animals, and captive-reared animals just don't seem to persist as well as those that have grown up in the wild.
Now, this is in regard to translocating wildlife for conservation purposes. There are other reasons for translocation that folks consider here, not the least of which removal of nuisance wildlife. This has been studied likewise, you say?
Yes, this has been looked at as well, and this is one that I deal with on a very regular basis because it seems here, not just in Kansas, but elsewhere in the United States, that there's a prevailing public belief that live capture and relocation or translocation of nuisance wildlife is the humane solution to the problem of nuisance animals in and around your buildings and landscaping. I think there's some fallacies in taking that approach, but it certainly seems to be a very, very common one.
What does the research say then about the impact in this respect?
Well, again, it depends somewhat on some of the same variables. Where was the animal captured? What species is the animal? Where has it been released? Has it been released into suitable habitat, or is it just taken down the road a few miles and released? When we look at those factors, some of the research reports show not very good success rate. I think of the studies that I looked at and it was reported on, the success rate ranged from 24% as a low to just a little bit over 50% of a success rate on the translocation of nuisance animals.
As a high, then?
As a high. So half of those animals that you're taking off thinking that they're going to live happily ever after have a very short lifespan. And that very short lifespan, in many cases, is less than 100 days. Another problem with translocation is, particularly of nuisance animals, is that animal may attempt to return to the site it was captured.
So this strongly indicates that live trapping and relocating nuisance wildlife is not the best solution for wildlife. There are other control options that merit greater consideration than relocation.
Yes, when you relocate the animal, removal of that animal simply creates a vacuum at that problem site that's often filled by new animals. So you're not being kind and gentle to many of these animals when you take them out of their home range where they know where all the food and water and the predators reside and take them and dump them in other release points.
Charlie, we appreciate the overview of all of this work today. Wildlife Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, that's Charlie Lee. Our time's away for today, and thanks to you once more for being along with us. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.